welcome back to a special episode of Sticks and Strings. I'm Naomi, and I'm going to be doing a tutorial on the Hunter Star coat pack by Quiltsmart. I'm joining you from my messy dream box and my wonderful sign that says, "Today I will be happier than a bird with a French fry." So I'm going to be walking through this. I got this some time ago and have gone through some trials and tribulations with these instructions. They're okay, but I think it's better to be to watch it happen, so that if you have this this interfacing kit, I hope this tutorial will help you just avoid some pitfalls that I fell into. They're called pitfalls for a reason. But anyway, so I'm going to walk you through this. We're making this square, and then I will show you at the end what it looks like when all four are put together. I haven't sewn them together yet, but I set them up, and it's actually really pretty. So I'm looking forward to finishing the jacket and getting this done. But I wanted to walk you through this. I'll meet you at the ironing table. So now I'm going to walk you through making a square for this Hunter Star coat pack here. It gives you all the instructions in here. Sorry, I'm trying to get this on camera. In terms of the size of fabric to cut and the strips, the triangles and strips to cut. So it gives you all that information. It's pretty basic. And then it goes through and gives you instructions how to make it, but I found that some of it was not clear. And the first couple ones I made, I wasn't happy with. So I'm making this tutorial because there isn't one, as far as I can tell, out there by Quiltsmart or anybody doing it. And again, this is for the Hunter Star jacket. I've expressed on my Three Sisters Creative channel that, I've expressed in past episodes that I was not happy with this product, but I was committed, so I figured out how to make it. And the way I did it was I had 4 different dark fabrics and 4 different light fabrics, and I had less of one of each than the rest, if that makes any sense. I had a lot of 3 of the fabrics, and then I added a 4th to kind of give it another jumble of colors, so that they're kind of uneven. So, and I just organized it by the dark colors. I'll put a picture here. I had all the dark colors laid out, and then I sort of distributed the light colors on them so that everything was evenly distributed. And so that's how I'm working through this. I put them according to dark color in a bag like this, and then by layers. So I know that each triangle has also the 3 strips on top of them, so I can just pull them out a set at a time, like this. So here's my set for this square. And it is, as the instructions say, 1.5 by 4 strips and 1.5 by 6.25 for these longer ones. And then these triangles are 6-inch squares cut on the diagonal. So you have 1 light triangle, 1 light long strip, and 2 light short strips, and the same for the dark color. So these 2 short strips we're going to set aside for the next step. And then these 2 short strips we set aside for the next step. Now, what we have here is the Quiltsmart square. You just rough cut the interfacing. It's fusible interfacing. And if you'll see, let me get it close to the camera, sorry. Right here, you can read fusible side, and that's how you know. And then the right, where it says right side, is backwards. Actually, I also think that's backwards, because the right side to me is where the fabric doesn't show any seams, and this side is the side you sew on, so to me this is the wrong side, but they labeled it right side and fusible side, so that's how you have to look at it. So, and you can also feel it, the fusible side has the bumps on there. So it says to orient it, it has directional, I'm sorry, I keep getting off camera. It has directional, like here's north, ow, I just hit my finger on the iron. Here's east, south, and west. So it says to orient it with north at the top. And I have chosen to do all my light colors to the east and all my dark colors to the west. And then I iron the seams all toward the dark. And that way when I put my squares together, it will work out seam-wise. I'm hoping. So what you do is you line up your cut pieces along the dotted lines, not the dark lines, but the dotted lines here. And actually it has to overlap. So the only dotted line you really pay attention to is this one that goes between these two solid lines are seam lines, and this dotted line is where you align the fabric. It doesn't really give you a place to, because these are bigger, obviously, because you have to trim off edges to make it squared up. But so it's hard to actually align this triangle vertically. And so what I do is I try to line it up along this dotted line, and then I pull back the corner. And if it looks kind of centered on this dotted corner, if it looks like if I lay it down, it looks like it's going to go right to the center, then I feel comfortable about it. And as long as it's overlapping, it doesn't really matter. So, and then you place, there's another dotted line here in the center, and two dotted lines that go across here. And this is where the long 6 1/4 strips go. So I set them down, and the instructions say there is supposed to be a gap in between here. Oops, not that much of a gap. So this is the most time-consuming, I think, part of this whole process, is trying to get these lined up and feel good about it. Then I put the other strip down in its rectangle. And then I'm using batiks, so it doesn't matter. They don't have a right and a wrong, which is nice. And so I try to line it up. Again, I check this little corner here. I check to see if it's aligned with the, I'm not sure if you can see that on camera, but there's the dotted lines there. I just kind of roll it back and see, well, does it look like it's in the center? It looks a little low, so I'm going to raise it up a little bit. I haven't fussed too much about that because, like I said, as long as it's all overlapping that dotted line, that's your trim line later. So as long as it's all overlapping that, you're good, because you're just going to trim it down. And then I fuss at it, and I fuss it and make sure it's all together. And then I take a pressing cloth. Now the instructions don't really tell you, at least in my instructions, what temperature iron, but I just use the no steam and polyester setting. And this is just a pressing cloth I got at Joann's. I can see through it well enough. And I don't like this gap. It looks a little bit too big. Oh, we got some static going on. That's never happened before. My cover is statically charged. Okay, so I can see everything's aligned. Everything looks like it's in the right place. Now, you don't want to iron up here where this fusible uncovered area is, because you need that glue to be intact for a later step. It doesn't tell you that in the instructions, but it's very important. So I very carefully line up my iron with the triangle. I don't know if you can see, you'll see it on the other triangle. And I just give it a few seconds of a press. You don't really need much more, because the fusible interfacing will stick to this plastic. I mean, it peels right off, but I'm saying if you ironed up here or down here, it would use up that glue. So you don't want to do that. So I put my iron just right on the edge of these strips like this, so that I'm not going into this unused space here. And what I mean about the triangles is I get the tip of my iron and I put it right on that triangle tip there, and then I turn it around and I'm going to line it up with this triangle tip right here. So I'm only ironing where there's fabric on the fusible interfacing. And then it just peels right off, no problem. And so everything's on there, stuck on there. And I did not use up the glue here and here, because when we add the small strips, that's where they're going to fuse down and adhere to this. So that's step one. Okay, now I'm ready to sew on my short strips. I'm at my sewing machine here, my little table. What you do now is you see you have the beginnings of the dark arrow and the light arrow here. And you, in order to make the diagonal, let me get one out here. In order to make this diagonal line, you sew the light strip on here in such a manner. I'll show you. You put one each perpendicular to the long strip of dark fabric, like this. Now, when I first made these, I lined the strip up with the end of the strip, which is what it tells you in the instructions. And it was a disaster, because not everything is, boy, this did not stick. Not everything is perfectly cut, obviously, because you're a human being. And if you'll notice, I don't know if you can see right here, when I set this down and fused it, it is not exactly on this line. And so if I were to put this here, it would not work out when I went to sew it, because you have to put the strip here and then turn it over and sew this sewing line. This is part of the thing about Quiltsmart that I don't like. It just says hold it in place so that it doesn't move. And that's too big of a gamble for me. So this is one reason I vote against using Quiltsmart. So what I figured out, and also if I align it with the end of this thing, and it's in a little bit of the wrong place, what happens is when you come and you sew this line, it's expecting that this one is going to go to the corner of that piece of fabric. But if it's not lined up on the other side correctly, then you wind up with, you know, maybe the seam comes to here on the fabric, and then when you try to fold it back, it doesn't fold correctly, and it doesn't line up with the rest of the strip. And the reason I found that out was two squares that are kind of messed up. So, and I had to resew and resew, and that's when I figured out that you can see, let's see, I'm going to try to pick it up. Maybe it's easier to see on the light colored side. When you look through on this light colored side right here, I'll show you. Let me get it aligned. You can see through the fabric, and in between, you can see my finger shadow, in between that little gap, there's the end of the sew line poking through right here. And the same thing happens on this side. And when you're sewing it, you can see them. On here, there's a little dot on the interfacing right here that shows up. Trying to show it on camera. But you can see where that alignment comes right there. So what I do is I take my strip and I put it here, and I don't worry about this end of the long strip. I worry about that sew line right there. So I know that it's coming at a diagonal, and I want the corner of my little strip to end right on that seam line. Okay, that way when I go the other side and I'm sewing blind, which is why I don't like this. Of course, I'm doing this tutorial and you're going to say, well, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to do it. I mean, there are some pluses and it's kind of part of this whole program. And if you, certainly if you already have it, you're going to want to, you know, use your money's worth, which is what I'm doing. But I'm just letting you know, if you do this, and I think it's an attractive pattern and an attractive little coat, this interfacing is separate from the Tamarack coat jacket pattern. You buy them separately, and you can do anything, and you make a coat out of it, you know, in terms of quilting. But if you already have this, I want you to be able to make the most of it. And if you decide to get it, you can avoid some pitfalls that, like I said, I had to. So you have to sew blind on the other side. You have to turn it over and sew. And so I can see on the edges of my fabric that the sew line starts here and ends right there. And so I want the corner of this little strip to end up right on that sew line. Now, how am I going to hold it there while I sew blind? And here's the answer. This is something, it's a glue stick by Sue Daly. She sells English paper piecing products, and recommends this glue to hold your the small pieces of fabric onto the cardboard pattern things that you use to create these English paper piecing patterns. And so I bought this a long time ago, and I thought, hey, I can use this. And what it is, it's just a very mild, it's just a very mild little glue stick. It doesn't hold very long or very hard, which is what you want. And I'm going to cut off this triangle anyway. So I just put a little bit of glue right there and glue this baby down. And that way I know it's not going anywhere. And then I come with the other light strip and I line it up to my sew line. I can see it poking through right here between the two pieces of fabric. And that's where I'm gonna line it up. I can see that the corner of my fabric is right on that sew line. So you see, because I didn't put this long piece in the exact right spot, it's edging over here. Now if I had lined this up here, it would mess up that triangle, that sew line. So I'm paying attention to the sew line underneath, and now I'm going to put a little bit of glue here. And for some reason, the interfacing under this strip did not stick to it, but that's okay because I'm going to sew it down in just 1 second. And now when I pick it up to sew, my little pieces don't come off. They are on there temporarily. And that glue isn't going to bother my coat, because after I sew this line, after I sew this sew line, I'm going to trim off this this triangle here. So the glue is going to get discarded. Now, when you turn it over, you remember which one you did. I just glued the light colored fabric to the dark colored strip, so I know that this is the seam line I want, not this one, right? Because there's no strip there. So, and for some reason, I always start in this center here, and I go toward the triangle. And then I'm going to come over here and start in this centered area and go this way toward the triangle. And that will sew down my two light colored strips. So I'm going to do that right now. And this is why I don't like Quiltsmart, because you have to sew blind, and I don't like sewing blind. Okay, I'm all lined up to sew now. I'm going to sew, like I said, from the center out toward the triangle along this sew line. And I'm going to try to end it right in between the two and not go onto the triangle, just because it makes it a little easier when you're doing the next seams. Oh, I should turn on my machine. That always helps. That's a big pointer. Turn on your sewing machine. So I like to end it right about there. And since I have this one already glued down, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And like I said, I like to go from the center line toward the triangle. Just do it the same every time. Alright, now I turn it over and I have these nice seam lines. Just a few little, I like to just cut my threads as I go. If you don't cut these, when you sew the long seams together, they kind of poke out. These aren't quite as important. So now you see, since I was very careful about where this ended, now when I go to iron this back, you'll see that the, if I put it on camera, you'll see that the edge of this fabric lines right up with this long strip. So that is why it is so important to match up that unseen seam line on the back. And you have a perfect little, it lines up perfectly right there. Now I'm going to finger press these out of the way. And it's important to make sure they stay out of the way when you do the dark strips. So I'm going to grab my dark strips and do the same exact thing. I'm going to, oh, wait. Before we do that, because I have forgotten this step and it makes me angry when I forget it. I've sewn this seam now. I'm going to pull this back. I'm going to unglue this little triangle here from the interfacing. And I'm going to trim back this to about 1/4 inch. So I just take my scissors, make sure everything else is out of the way, and cut off that little triangle. Now, when you fold it back, because this is such a light fabric, you won't see that, oops, sorry, you won't see that big dark triangle back there. So you just trim off so you have a small seam allowance here, and then finger press it backwards. So I'm going to do it on this side as well. Sometimes you have to peel it off the interfacing and trim that off. And if you don't have a butter tub for your scraps, are you even a seamstress? So here's my vintage Land O'Lakes butter tub. It's my go-to trash can for my sewing table. I can't get rid of it. I know I've seen patterns for making other ones. I'm like, no, I have to use my butter tub. Okay, so I've finger pressed these out of the way. When I finish the next step, then I will iron them down. But for now, I'm going to finger press those out of the way, and I'm going to take my dark strips and do the same exact thing. Okay, I'm going to line up the corner of this, oh, I keep going off camera, I'm so sorry. I'm going to line up the corner of this fabric to that little tiny seam line that I can see. Not sure if you can, but if you are making this, you will see that the seam line comes out and peaks between the two pieces of fabric. And I'm going to take my glue. I'm going to pull back the little corner here and just do a dab or two, and I know that that's on there. I'm going to come to this side, make sure it's lined up. I'm going to make sure it's lined up to that small seam line right there. I so wish you could see it. I'll take some close-up photos. Actually, I think I did. I'll insert them here. I've taken close-up photos of every step, so it might be different fabric, but you'll see what I'm talking about in those photos. This one I didn't line up quite straight enough for my liking. Yeah, that one's a little crooked. I'm going to replace it. Nice thing about this glue, it's just temporary. You don't have to, no, that's really crooked. You don't have to worry about it if you need to move things. Okay. So that's on there. Now, this is where you need to be extra careful. When you turn this thing over, Reason number 55, I don't like Quiltsmart. When you turn this over, you need to make sure that these strips stay, but you don't want to iron them down because there's too much danger of wasting this glue, like I said before. So you want to just make sure they're out of the way and make sure that these don't flop back, because then you'll have a real mess. So you're going to take them very carefully and turn them over. And then when they're upside down, you can kind of just peek under and make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be. Okay, because you're going to be sewing on this line now. And you can kind of see the dark fabric under there, so you know that that's where you're supposed to be. And you can see that everything else is out of the way. And sometimes when you're flipping it around to do the other side, this one can kind of get in the way also. So you just want to make sure everything is nice and out of the way. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start this center line and come out. I'm going to trim off that little thread, just so it's not a mess. And I'm feeling underneath, and I'm making sure everything's out of the way. There's my light strip out of the way. My dark strip is out of the way over here, where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to sew this line right here. This is my Juki. I love this Juki. It's my TL 2010Q for quilting. And I love it. It has a knee lift. Magic. And it has a thread cutter. So now I'm here. I'm making sure there's my light strip. My dark strip is where it's supposed to be. I'm going to get on this line. And I'm going to sew this way. Alright, so there's my 2 sewn lines. You can see them. Or 4, I mean. My 4 sewn lines. Now I'm going to come over here. And before I cut this triangle, I'm going to check and make sure that it's in the right place. Because even though I was very careful, I'm not perfect. I just want to make sure there's no glaring, like, it's not really off here. It's not as perfect as I would like it. You can see that it's a little bit above. It doesn't line up quite as nicely as the last one I showed you. But it's good enough. It's good enough. It's within the seam allowance that's going to be taken up in a second, so it's not going to show. It's still going to make a crisp line there. And this one looks pretty darn good. Now I am going to trim off these threads. Oops, and I cut my triangle. That was great. Everybody makes mistakes. Alright, so now I've got these strips all sewn on, and you can see my arrow start to form here. There's my light arrow, here's my dark arrow. Now I'm going to go to the ironing board and I'm going to iron these down with my pressing cloth, because there's still some interfacing here that can get stuck to my iron, and I don't want that, so I'm going to use that pressing cloth and I'm going to iron those. I'm going to actually show you that because there's also another trick just to make things better. Okay, I'm here at my ironing board. Now, if you're wondering why my ironing board is so busy, it's actually a TV tray. And Missouri Star Quilt Company has some tutorials about making an ironing surface from a TV tray. So I keep it right by my sewing machine so I can just turn and sew and then come here and iron. And it's very busy because it was a yard of fabric that I just happened to have on hand. I had picked a different one, but then I messed up the cutting. So it went into my scrap pile for later, and I had this unused yard, and I love it. It's camping, and I enjoy looking at it. So it's busy for the film, but sorry. Okay, so what I was going to show you is here, I don't iron both sides at once because of the static and everything. They can get a little cattywampus. So what I do is I leave these alone, and I put my pressing sheet kind of in a triangle just over it. And then I pull this back and I straighten and maybe even tug a little. Not stretching, but making sure that these are straight and that this fold is as folded as possible. You know what I mean? It's not puckered or pleating there. So I hold this down, I put the pressing sheet down, and I hold it down because I've noticed that sometimes they kind of move around. So then I get the iron and just give it 3 or 4 seconds. You don't want to move it around because well, at least this pressing sheet doesn't like that. It doesn't want to like glide. It just wants to be pressed this way. So now I've got this pressed down and it's great. So now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. These are all set. I'm going to pull this here. I'm going to go under the pressing sheet and just give it a tug. I can kind of see where they are. It's a little warm. It's okay. So now I've got that nice and set, nice and crisp. You can see those nice crisp lines there. So I'm going to just press that. Give it a few seconds. All right, now pull this back and everybody's fused. Now we head back to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew these seams. So you fold it along that dotted line where you lined up the fabric before, and you sew the solid lines, and then you're going to do this one and then that one. So I'll meet you over at the sewing table. Okay, I am back at the sewing table and I'm going to finish this square. You fold it over at that dotted line, and sometimes depending on how you put your fabric down, it could be there could be some fabric overlapping that dotted line, and you'll actually need to just kind of, you could use your iron if you need to, but you need to really just fold it over even if there's fabric in the way, because you're sewing, you want to be as close to that line as you on that side as you are on this side, which really means folding it right along that that dotted line. And I miss quite often, so you just do what you can. Like I said, it's not ideal. I would actually much rather, I think, just go ahead and piece things together in the traditional way, but here I am. I'm 8 squares from finishing this jacket, so I'm just making the best of it. It's all we can do every day. Whoops, crooked. Made a crooked seam, and it's not great, but it's pretty close. It'll all come out literally in the wash, I think. So now I'm going to do the center seam. I don't worry about crooked seams, and I don't worry about mistakes unless they're really big and I can't get around them. So I want to make sure this is folded right on the dotted line. I may be interrupted by a cat any moment. If you watch Three Sisters Creative, I have talked about Hobbs, and there he is. Say hello, Hobbs. Say hello. He's my mess maker. You can't be here. Oh, you're so naughty. Alright, get down. He'll probably jump up 3 more times. And he, as you probably heard on the channel, he's the reason I don't get anything done. Okay, back to sewing the seam. You want to make sure that your previously sewn triangle is out of the way. I'm sorry. I'll probably not cut him out. He's too cute. It happens all day, every day. Everything I make should have a label that says, no, no, do not. That says, this probably has cat hair in it. If you're offended by cat hair, I'm so sorry, but... I love the cat it comes on, so what am I going to do? Okay, let's see how this one... That one looks good on this side. Oh, almost. It looks good in the center and not on the edges. That's funny. Okay, that's all right. So I've sewn 2. You see I've got 2 of those seams done. I need to do this 3rd one. And I like to turn it over because it's easier to manage this little triangle than the whole square. You want to make sure you're right on the dotted line there. Push everybody over. Just sew right on the line. So I think, oh, and here's a real world problem. Ran out of bobbin thread. I'm going to replace my bobbin and finish this seam. But what I was going to say is, I think everybody thinks that this is attractive because you don't have to worry about your seam allowance. You just follow the dot, you know, the sew on the dot on the solid lines. But I still worry about the seam allowance because, as you see over here, it's not right on this line. So I don't know if all my squares are exactly the same. I haven't had the courage to measure them because, you know, they're not all perfectly sewn right on the seam lines. So does that affect the size of the squares? Probably. But at this point, with this tool, I'm just having to go with it. I can't freak out over every seam and worry about that. I haven't even measured each square because I'm going to put them together in large 12-inch squares and then trim them at that point. It's going to be on a jacket that I'm going to be wearing, and if anybody comes and measures my squares, they're not my friend. So I'm just going to go with it. And I know it will be okay because fabric is a living, breathing thing, and it's not a house that will fall down if it's crooked. So, so that's my take on this. I don't like this product, and I don't think it makes it really any easier than actually just piecing something together. For instance, you could sew these together on a 45-degree angle and you'd have strips, and then you just put the strips next to the triangles, sew them down, and it's the same thing without doing all the ironing and the sewing blind and everything else. So yeah, if you already have this product, I'm hoping that I'm helping you use it in the best way. If you don't have this product, I kind of can't recommend it. I think it would be easier to just piece things together and not. And also, I worry a little bit that this interfacing is going to add a layer of kind of stiffness to the jacket. I'm hoping that when I wash it, it will soften and not give such a stiffness, because then you add this plus batting plus the lining, and I don't want it to be stiff. So anyway, so now I have to fix this seam, and then I'm going to take it to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron it from the top under the pressing sheet again, because I don't want any of this interfacing to get stuck to my iron. So, and I don't want to trim it yet because it needs to be ironed flat. So I start with the light triangle, and I press this way, and then I press this way, and I press that way. I press all the seams on all the squares towards the dark arrow. and I will, I'll show you why. Okay, so I finished sewing that one seam where I ran out of bobbin thread right here. And now to trim it, I tried using a rotary cutter, and which is what my usual go-to, but for some reason I was having trouble feeling like these were really well squared, and really kind of stressing over this corner here because the corner is a little squirrely. So I decided to hand trim these. So I have these really great scissors. I can't remember the brand name, but they're serrated. The blades are serrated so they don't slip, and they're really always very sharp. So I use these, and I just cut right along the dotted lines. And then when I get to these folds, I aim for the dotted line that's just past it. And it usually coincides right with the end of the stitching. And get it right in there. And you can see under here where I cut through that seam, it's still right along the dotted line there. So I know that that's at least how it was intended to fit together. And I always start at the opposite ends of those folds because I want to have that sort of, I want to aim at that corner coming from the other side. And you see my seams are all ironed toward the dark fabric. And this decision, you know, I was trying to square them when I was trimming them, and I was, the first couple that I did that way, I wasn't really happy. And so I decided to just trim them here and worry about squaring them later. So that's my trimmed square. And so that's how I trim those. So as I put them together, I'm going to do light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, like so. Right? Goes like that. And like that. And I'm going to make sure that all the fabrics, oh, isn't that pretty? So when I do this, because I have ironed all the seams toward the dark, when I go to sew these two together, say, I'm going to flip it like this. All the seams on this square are going this direction, and all the seams on this square are going the opposite direction. You'll see? So when I go to sew this seam, and these two lines have to meet up, and they have to be crispy, those seams are, getting the right light, those seams are nested there and here at the corners as well. And that should happen on every 12-inch square like this. And it'll happen this way also because this seam is ironed this direction, this seam is ironed this direction. So that's my neuroses at work for me. That way I know that when I put these together, all of these will nest. I don't know about square to square, but it should also in theory work, because a dark square will be here, a dark arrow will be here, and those seams are opposite. So depending on how I don't know, but at least in this scenario, in these four seams, they will all nest. And wow, I'm excited now to wear this jacket, even if I'm angry at Quiltsmart. I think that's awfully pretty, don't you? So that is the Quiltsmart Hunter's Arrow Square. If you're doing this along with everyone else, I wish you luck. I did not use the Free Spirit fabrics that were recommended for the whole free spirit coat challenge that's going on. I think it ends in May. I didn't like them, and I couldn't afford them, and I had a gift card to Joann's, so that's where I bought my fabric, and they didn't carry free spirit. So that was my story, but I'm pretty happy with the batiks that I chose. This isn't all of them. I have more colors, varied colors, and obviously when I finish the coat, I will be showing it off on Three Sisters Creative, but I just wanted to make this little tutorial and hope that it helps. And I'm sorry for my bad reviews of Quiltsmart, but you never know. You buy a product and you just don't know if you're going to like it or not. And so I've learned a lot through it, but I did want to put this out there if anyone else is struggling or hasn't started yet and wants to make good on their purchase and not waste money. Go ahead and use it, because I think it makes a very pretty pattern. And I used high contrast fabrics so that I could really see the arrows, because I really like that. Yeah, so good luck with your, if you're doing this, good luck with it. And happy sewing, happy knitting. See you out there. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I hope it helps if any of you are working on this. I'm looking forward to finishing. I'm sure I will show you the finished coat on Three Sisters Creative on our regular episodes. I hope that you like this video, you give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel. There's lots of nonsense every week when we sit together as sisters and talk, and we're hoping to do more of these tutorials. I have a couple planned, maybe some with spinning and knitting. So I'll see you in the future. See you out there. Thanks. Bye.